It's great to be the first speaker of the day, uh, besides all the amazing people who just preceded me. So I'll give you all the compliments, Sunir and Jason. Thank you for hosting such an amazing show. I've always felt that there should be a forum where partner professionals get together and it doesn't feel like Alcoholics Anonymous sharing our sad stories. What has really happened in this decade of the ecosystem is as we are turning revenue, as we are selling together, as we are becoming 60% of revenue for our companies, this has become the place to be. This has become the profession to be in. And this is great to get that energy back in this profession. So thank you for being part of that change. Thank you for leading your organizations towards that change. And this is incredible to have you all here today. So I'm going to talk about getting the ecosystem to sell together. I'll start with my own personal journey. Before I co-founded WorkSpan, I was with SAP. And one fine morning, I was given responsibility for a product called HANA. It was just coming out. It was the first database product from SAP, and we didn't know how to sell it because it was largely an application company which sold to the C-suite, did not know how to sell to database markets. And we suddenly realized that it's really a partner-led market. If you think about database appliances, partnering with hardware companies like HPE, Dell, Fujitsu, anybody who would put an appliance together. Partnering with other tech companies, startups. We created a SAP HANA startup focus program, recruited over 5,000 young tech companies into that program. And any of you who have been to Stanford down there has seen HANA House, for example. That was an initiative to actually capture tech startups coming out of Stanford to recruit into this program so that they can find the SAP HANA platform to actually build on top of it. So it was really interesting to build an ecosystem from ground up, but also take advantage of existing ecosystems with large hardware and large SIs like Accenture, Deloitte, and everybody together. And when you create that ecosystem-led GTM, which is completely different than our direct sales model, you learn a lot of things. And our learning was that partner-led growth is exponential. It builds on each other. The moment you put and work with two partners, you increase win rates. You get into new buying centers just because they have access and you don't. No credibility in the database space, but credibility with a partner, right? Things like that have started to happen. But all of this was on spreadsheets. Can you imagine running thousands and thousands of partner plans on spreadsheets? Yesterday, Zoom talked about operationalizing partnering. And that was her biggest regret, that she had not spent enough time operationalizing partnerships. And when you think about that insight, partnering is hard. You're literally doing swivel chairs, looking at your own CRM and then moving it forward with partners, convincing not only your company, but also the partner company of the opportunity within the window of time you have. Speed is of essence, and we are working with these kinds of tools. So I thought that has to be a better way. Went back to the company and said, I need to do this startup, and it's got to be in the partnering space. So out of hard work, and the results were astounding if you think about it. Against a backdrop of 2008, when most companies, especially large ERP players, their software was not getting bought, this product against that backdrop went from 0 to $1.5 billion in about a year. That's the speed at which the partnering world can actually add benefits to you. So I went back. Coincidentally, my other co-founder, Mayank, and the other founder, Milind, we are all IIT Bombay classmates. And Mayank had founded Aster Data Systems. And even Aster Data had done a lot of work in the partnering space. In fact, one of their biggest partners, Teradata, ended up acquiring them for a 300 million or so exit. So his expertise building bigdata.org and Aster Data in an ecosystem working with ETL players and others was very instrumental. What I found at SAP and what he founded as a startup, we realized that the next big application wave after the sales automation, the marketing automation, has to be ecosystem automation. So we founded this company, and it's been an amazing ride. Back then, when you talk to companies about ecosystem automation, they would say, but we've got Salesforce, we've got this, we've built a We built a field in Salesforce to drop down there, and you know what? We manage all our partnering right there. I'm like, that field is equal to partnering? That didn't seem right. So how do we make partnerships work? How do we build a platform for ecosystems? And more importantly, if you were to build a new application from ground up, the idea that it doesn't need to be a software as a service application only, it could be a network. It could be a network of connected companies. And that's the big insight. So essentially, the problem that we ended up solving or trying to solve came from this insight that it's not just your company, but similar problem, not just your company and your partner, but it is a multi-dimensional problem where everybody is trying to work with everybody else. Alan yesterday talked about massive churn rate in the SaaS world because companies are not effectively working with one another, integrating with one another, going to market with one another to reduce the risk. And everybody is in this format working with each other, but not well enough. This got to change. Disparate tools are creating a lot of risk. In fact, I know of horror stories where an entire CRM dump was sent to the wrong partner. In fact, you're leaking competitive information to a partner because you're working on spreadsheets. It's crazy. They're disjointed processes. They're borrowed tools. Tools that were built for marketing or for sales, they were not meant and designed ground up for the partnering professional. Because you are an afterthought in those tools, they end up creating disjointed processes in the company. And if you think of different workflows and inconsistent data in all there, you are literally not able to stand before your board. If you, in fact, a lot of companies are now hiring chief partner officers. And as you think about this, you have to stand before the board and create and justify a metric for influence, a metric for partner-derived revenue, partner-influenced revenue. And you cannot have inconsistent data and count it twice. So no single source of truth. And if you're leveraging multiple data sets, this kind of accuracy gets in the way of performance. And lastly, it's about culture and mindset as well. As I talked before, there will be good times and there'll be bad times. In bad times, should the partnering professional's neck be on the block all the time? No. In this new era of partnering and all the professionals around here, the impact that you've created to revenue has actually elevated this professional to the C-suite, this profession to the C-suite. We've seen, for example, at SAP, Carl, he's now the chief partnering officer. You've seen at IBM, you've seen at Workday, you've seen at not just large companies, but even companies that are fast-growing companies. They have put really good resources, the right culture and mindset now to take advantage of this partnering. So what a wonderful time we are in. And we have the opportunity to actually solve these challenges. So as we think about this, what could be a path? How could we use the ecosystem flywheel to actually move forward? And we've thought a lot. In fact, as we worked with many companies since the last 5 years, we realized that there's some magic to it. And if we structure our work along these magic moments, then we get to real success together. So where this starts is actually the co-innovation. In co-innovate, working with each other, creating co-innovation, or through co-innovation, creating new joint solutions, this gives you ultimately what the end customer wants. So in this flywheel, the customer is in the center, and what we are doing is creating new joint solutions faster to market together with your ecosystem partners. Then once these solutions are ready, you're taking it to market together. And because you're taking it to market together, you're literally spending half the cost and getting twice the audience and twice the reach. And we've seen successful companies who have used best practice processes for co-marketing, where there is a win-win involved, that they are able to speak with clarity to the shared customer. They're not confusing the customer. They are literally on the same page with the message and get the expected outcomes. And being fair in lead distribution. This is another example. In the old channel world, lead distribution was very structured. In the new co-sell world, it has to be a lot more analytical. There are best practices around this. And come talk to us if you want to learn about those best practices of how do you create synergies in a larger ecosystem where a lead can actually be multi-sourced. A lead can actually be sourced with multiple people and shared with multiple people at the same time. The third big muscle to build in this area is co-sell. And you would hear a lot of new best practices coming in this space. So if you think of the old channel world and companies registering deals, there's no trust in that process. You register deals for protection of your margin. And then you have to come back at it again and again and say, are you still working the deal? Otherwise, I'm going to take this away from you. And there are horror stories around deal registration. It's a completely untrusted system. But in a co-sell scenario where you're working with your peers, the best practices around co-sell are completely different. There are new practices on joint accounts called 2x2, 5x5. If you don't know what they are, it is essentially nominating accounts where you have matched, for example, on tools like Crossbeam. Come match it on Crossbeam, work with WorkSpan, for example, to actually take those joint account planning processes forward on 2 accounts, on 5 accounts at a time, and then eventually build a whole market framework that gets you into new markets, new buying centers, without hiring even more salespeople in a linear way. That's where you get the exponential benefits. Similarly, for lead sharing and co-sell referrals, there are best practices processes around how companies should actually do this new kind of process. It's slightly different than deal registration, but ultimately it gives you the influence tracking that you need. And this is something that as a professional, we all have to learn how to be experts at co-selling. And lastly, in the flywheel, how do you reinvest back into the relationship? You've built an amazing solution together. You've done the integration hard work with other software companies. You've co-marketed it, worked with shared customers in one voice. You actually build the deal and the framework and the pipeline for your sales teams to work and win together. It's time to reinvest back into the relationship. And if you put a dollar back in here, what we've seen is easily 20x returns. And this is what Alan was talking yesterday about. Typical GTM stovepipes actually tap out at 10x investment, 10x market returns. Best marketing campaigns will give you the 10x return. But a dollar spent into an ecosystem initiative actually gets you 20x. And we have proof point because we track these metrics across the board. And along as we build this product, as we build this network, what happened was as companies started learning the best practices working with one another, it was not just the application, but it was the network and the effect of working with other companies on a shared network that created this flywheel effect, where new partnerships, new innovations, new competencies, new resources, and better value for all of us started gathering on such a platform. The idea here is, once you have a shared network, it's like your LinkedIn. You can reach out, you can create a business plan together. On that plan, you can actually make your best practices come alive and actually measure it against another partnership that you have on the metrics, on the new metrics that you've done. It is a peer-to-peer network. What a wonderful change from the day of going to another portal. No partner in the world wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, I have to go to that company's portal and this company's portal and this company's portal. Nobody does that. Even if it is the best partnering company out there, you are worried about your customer. You're worried about what solution would I pitch to that customer and which partners in the room will help me make that customer happy. So this is what it is all about. And fast forward 6 years now, with every partner that has come and joined as a peer on the network, leaving alone their own partner portals. I would call them private airports, if you will. Instead of landing into a private airport, you join a hub. And there are many such hubs out there. WorkSpan is just one of them. The idea here is you connect as a peer, you come in with your own company single sign-on, your own security, your own CRM to a process, you connect once, and then you can work with anybody else. And everybody is a peer, however big they are. Whether you're a Microsoft, a Google, a AWS, an SAP, or you are a young startup, it's the same. It's the same experience. And each line there represents a shared opportunity between these companies. And what's amazing about this is, once you taste success with this, you want more of it. And that's what we've seen. The fat lines in this graph are companies that have seen success, and they have doubled down on this. So there's now emerging practices that have created how to build new pipeline through partners that we should talk about. This is the new way to market, the new way to co-sell, that's different than the old way to do it. These are some of the results we've received. So last year alone, on co-selling, we did $47 billion in pipeline through this network. Let that number sink in. 47 billion. And why is that number astounding? And this speaks to the kind of work Sunir and team have done. The hard work of this community, this room full of professionals who have gotten together. When we create these numbers, we actually used to do that, but it was in spreadsheets, it was in conversations, it was in pre-pipeline. And imagine in enterprise software, everybody here has seen deal cycles that go from 6 months, 9 months, right? Nobody remembers the partnering professional, the partner manager who actually connected on the deal 9 months ago. Because that lineage is lost. There's no system of record for it. This is not just WorkSpan or a company like us creating it. It was already there. It was invisible. This is a system that made it visible, connected it to Salesforce and your CRM system, and now you can draw a very, very bright line between partner-generated, partner-influenced revenue and our role. So that's what it is. And reinvestment back. Now you're generating this revenue, so you're able to go back to your CRO, to the head of, to your CEO and say, look, we are able to generate this kind of revenue, so we need to reinvest back in partnering motions. And last year on WorkSpan alone, companies spent $1 billion with other partners. Can you imagine that? $1 billion on other partners. I'll give you one example of a best practice. I'll pick examples on each one of them. VMware. In the old world, they would give incentives to partners just at deal registration and say, hey, you got us a deal, the deal won, we'll give you something. In the cloud world, what they're doing is they're doing customer lifecycle incentives. So first, when you do a POC on a new integration, let's say on a Tanzu they've integrated with a startup, you'll get an incentive for just doing a POC or an initial assessment work. Then once you sell, you get another incentive. And then when you deploy, you get another incentive together with them. And when you renew, you get another incentive with them. So what they're doing is they're completely aligning their customer lifecycle with their partnering lifecycle, right? And these are some new best practices that has emerged in the co-investment space, that you're literally putting your money where your mouth is in terms of partnering. Same thing with co-sell. What we found was one of the best practices is like, hey, unless the partner shares, can I join a network like WorkSpan and you know what, I'll find deals. But unless you share, you don't get. And on the same deal, if you don't collaborate, you actually don't make progress forward. So how do you measure these things? Is there engagement on a deal? Is there engagement in terms of overall addition of the pipeline? How do you measure it? There are some really good best practices in that space. Same thing with co-innovation. You would find it amazing. All of us are innovators here as software companies. But what we've found is that while our software and innovation process can be unstructured, if the partnering process is not structured, it actually flounders. Companies take 6 to 9 months to actually build integrations that should ideally take 4 to 6 weeks. And that's not because technology and APIs are not there. It's because the partnering processes are not crystal clear as to who does what in the sequence of identifying, building, architecting, launching, and then launching with success to each other's partnering teams. And the moment you structure that process, like Fortinet has done, for example, like a lot of good security companies have done on WorkSpan, what you find is there's velocity to this motion. You can not only launch in 4 to 6 weeks, you can actually see, because of this flywheel, leads, revenue, and reinvestment back into this relationship. So when you think of the new GTM model, the go-to ecosystem model that Alan talks about, you have to think about all these 4 things put together. How do you co-innovate? How do you co-market? How do you co-sell? And how do you co-invest back into the relationship? And as such, one of the key tenets of this thing is, how do you build a shared space in between, where not just, we call this a 4 in a box, it's your salesperson, it's your partnering person, it's your partner salesperson, and it's your partnering salesperson, all 4 people on the same page. And how does that happen? The sales team members will remain in their systems of record, whether it is Salesforce or Dynamics or HubSpot. But the partnering professional on a shared space, that's the key change. Having a shared network and a shared space where you're literally on the same page with the partner, this is going to create huge amount of change in how you work in a boundaryless way, how you work in an empowered cross-functional team across joint solutioning and joint selling, for example, because it requires solution managers and sellers to actually come together and build trust in a GTM. So having these shared spaces, Slack is a good example of that, but it's unstructured. You need a structured partnering process to go along so that you can put joint selling professionals across two companies together. And why not take advantage of some amazing hubs in the network while you do that? So it's not just within the room. How many of you work with large hyperscalers like an AWS or a Google or a Microsoft, right? So these companies, they've created massive platforms, and their hope is ISVs like ourselves would actually build on their platform and take advantage of their massive customers. So when you connect to a network like ours, using your Salesforce system, you can actually connect bidirectionally to each one of them on day zero. And that's the advantage. It's not just peering within our base. It's often assumed that, hey, small companies will partner with other small companies. Absolutely untrue. You can punch way above your weight. You are actually driving massive consumption for AWS, Microsoft, and Google. And then you need to take advantage of massive wallets available at these companies because they have joint inbound referrals and leads for you, because they often are in customer conversations where they have large contracts, and in those large contracts they need your innovation. So the power of innovation and working in an aligned way with a larger partner like these guys, they gets you in the room. It gets you not only on the room but also in the deal books together. And almost all these companies have now created partnering programs, co-selling programs. So if you look at AWS's ISV co-sell program, they actually give incentives for using tools like WorkSpan, for example, to drive this joint selling process. And not only that, their partner sellers actually retire quota on the basis of your product that's driving their consumption. So massive, massive. If you've not already explored this thing, definitely explore it, because you must be built on one of these large hubs and large platform hyperscalers. So this connectivity right from your Salesforce system down to a larger hyperscaler through tools like WorkSpan is the automation that you need. And if you don't have that automation, essentially what you're doing is, again, back to swivel chairs. This is where we are spending a lot of our time in an unproductive way. Instead of being general managers of large relationships like this, you're literally spending your time scraping spreadsheets. Sunir asked me to talk about 5 or so competencies that you need. What has changed literally in terms of your infrastructure, your stack, and what needs to actually change from where you're at to where you need to be. First thing is that as you put your partner programs together, as you work your alliances together, the first one we believe is an ecosystem business process. Think of it as an end-to-end process. It may start in your company, but it really needs to end in another partner's company. And if you have not thought through of that as an ecosystem process, there's something wrong. So in your co-selling process, for example, in your co-solutioning process, for example, put together that end-to-end process, and you will figure out all the bottlenecks that exist. So when we, for example, put the cross-company processes with AWS, with their large ISV startup program, we realized 6-7 bottlenecks that we worked through, and now this program can now work at really good scale. Second is, Jay McBain at Forrester talks about this. With the death of cookie data, partnering data is going to become really, really important. Partnering data is going to be the most trusted data in B2B sales. And as such, your own contributed data would roughly be 1,000th of the data you should be looking at. Let that sink in. Which means that you need to have an ecosystem data hub strategy to begin with. And when you work in a shared system with partners, their insights, for example, on a given deal, they may be upstream to you, and as such, they may have marked a deal as one, and you know that because that deal has been marked as won by your number one partner, your chances of winning the deal next actually goes up. Your win rate will actually go up on those deals. So that ecosystem insight, one solution selling more than the other, one kind of marketing campaigns working more with a given partner than the other. This kind of insight is not only on your data, but on partnering data. And what is really important here is how is that data shared? If you have not thought about data governance, especially for second party partner data, you will be making the same mistake that the marketing professionals made with regard to consumer data. We as a profession can't make that mistake. And that's why it's really, really important to secure data at the field level. To secure data in such a way that only people who need to have access to that data can see it, and your partners trust you to actually follow through and do that. So if your partnering infrastructure and network doesn't have this control, there will be a problem. Fourth is intelligence, right? You're driving intelligence, you're driving metrics. Just as in marketing, and this is a best practice actually lifted from sales and marketing, just as marketing had sales accepted leads, marketing qualified leads, the taxonomy, the language around it is fixed. In ecosystem, consistently use these kinds of metrics, such as ecosystem qualified leads, partner influenced revenue, partner generated revenue. Once our profession gets consistent about these metrics and knows how to measure them, and all of us talk in the same language, this is where we will actually drive massive influence in the industry. So ecosystem intelligence is the next piece. And lastly, it's a multi-party ecosystem. I don't know how many of you have done collaborations where you were one company, but you had to work with, let's say, another services company and possibly another ISV or a hyperscaler. Like it's a three-way collaboration. It's emerging. It's about 10 to 15% right now from what we see in our data. But it is that piece because people are not used to working in multi-party systems, but it is coming up in a big way. Learn, this is a key piece here, learn how you can actually do that. And jointly going three ways, actually, we have seen that the win rates not only shoot from 33 to 47, but actually 65%. When you actually collaborate three ways, the win rate is extraordinarily high. And if you learn how to do that really, really well, it gives you an enormous leg up in the industry. So those were on the technical infrastructure side. And these are the 6 best practices that we've seen on the business side. Number one, because we are living in a Copernican moment in our ecosystem, the Copernican moment is very simple. Instead of you thinking as yourself, your company as a center of universe and organizing around an ecosystem of your satellite partners and everything, the customer is really the sun. The customer is in the center. So manage customer lifecycle. You're not here to manage the partner lifecycle. And as we learned in the VMware case, every collaboration, if it is customer centric, there's a true North Star, there's a true sun in the middle. And that keeps everybody honest. So every time you struggle on a partnering decision, go back to the true North Star. Am I looking at a customer lifecycle or am I looking at a partnering lifecycle? And more often than not, you will find yourself in a partnering lifecycle that's not working well. Second is co-sell. How do you make it repeatable? Does every co-sell situation be a unique one? No, it doesn't need to be. That's why the joint solutioning work exists upfront. So all the co-solutioning work that you will do upfront will actually lead to more joint selling later on. Third is enabling opportunity data. Now this is really important because data sharing as an infrastructure has just evolved. You need to secure not only the records that you share with a partner, but who it is shared with, so access control, and then what is shared with them, down to the field level. And this is where most CRM systems, because they assume that it is built for people inside one company, they have taken no care about actually data governance at the field level. Because you know what, it's within the company. Everybody gets to see the whole data. But when you send that data outside, you have to really think about GDPR, which means obviously securing personal PII information. But even beyond that, there is business critical information. For example, what's the deal forecast for this quarter? It's a financially sensitive number you don't want to share. A customer name, for example, you may not want to share very early on. You may want to share on stage 3 of the collaboration, not in stage 1. So how do you have stage specific data privacy? working with a partner. So this infrastructure is really, really important. So enabling data sharing at scale with privacy is super important. Fourth is metrics. As you are doing partnering work, remember this is also about how the partnering work is seen internally and externally. And people and leaders who are not able to measure and communicate in clear numbers, they're not going to do well. As opposed to that, what I've seen is chief ecosystem officers, chief partner officers who have been able to communicate clearly with data, they have really, really done well for themselves and their teams. So more investment will only result just because you have established metrics that your company is looking at. And the other piece is accountability. Partnering world, especially the old partnering world, is notorious for this lack of accountability. You may invest a lot of money and not see any return on the other end. But in this peering world, in this shared co-sell world, how do you run things differently? And here, the software principles of Agile have actually come into the partnering world as well. And Agile sprints, running cadence calls almost like Agile sprints, is how some of the newer best practices in driving accountability has come in. And those concepts you're seeing companies actually put and codify in software so that you can run these joint cadence calls almost like Agile sprints. And lastly, one of the best practices we have is learning how to sell together in 3 ways or 4 ways. We talk about how future is here. It's not evenly distributed. If you are in a 5G or an IoT, Internet of Things kind of a deal, those companies, those startups, those ISVs are already working in multi-partner format because different pieces of technologies actually come together here to serve a common customer need. And we are seeing these patterns as you see the massive migration from on-premise to cloud. This is also enabled by multi-partner selling. So net, these best practices together with the technical underlying capabilities required for ecosystem management and these best practices in terms of creating new co-sell processes for your company is what is needed to make the next generation, the next decade of the ecosystem successful. And what is at stake? What kind of results can you expect? These are results that we've seen from our customers. 20% or more revenue growth. Because we measure, we know. And this is important. Second is win rate. We've actually improved and you have actually improved. If you work effectively with partners, you can actually directly measure the increase in win rate. And that's because you're bringing influence and multiple buying centers. Almost all enterprise decisions are collaborative decisions. Not just bringing the IT, but also the business side, because the partner has a business connection. Making those connections happen actually leads to much better win rate. But if you don't measure, you don't know. Increased productivity, huge. 4 to 6 hours of time every week partnering professionals spend on spreadsheets, cleaning them up, securing them, making sure it is right. I've seen horror stories where there are 52 different tabs, one for each week for a cadence call. Can you imagine that? This is where the time gets sunk. This is low grunt work. Now it's the time to automate and get this productivity. We've talked about return on investment. Instead of putting $1 or in addition to putting $1 in marketing, why not put that dollar in partnering, co-investing in joint marketing campaigns, in co-selling initiatives, in co-building new solutions? That'll give you a 20x ROI. So imagine making that business case to the board. In terms of joint solutioning work, instead of waiting for 6 to 9 months of work, why not launch new solutions in 4 to 6 weeks? That's a 6x acceleration to time to market. And if you have a 6x acceleration to time to market, imagine the spoils that comes together with it. Oftentimes, even us as a company, in our own small story, we find that instead of WorkSpan building that next big feature, if we partnered better with a partner, we can actually serve that end customer together really well. And lastly, account and market expansion. You have the sales force you have. The only way to get and multiply this by a factor, by an exponential factor, is by effective partnering. And we have seen 3x market expansions actually happen because you are not addressing a particular segment or a particular region or a particular industry, this is exactly what you can expect out of this thing. So with that, here are some companies who have done that, who are actually seeing a lot more from the partnering world, these kinds of returns. So these are up and growing fast companies like Action IQ in the CDP space, PagerDuty, Abnormal Security, but also established ISVs like Citrix, like Cisco with their security and new solutions, VMware, all three hyperscalers, AWS, Google, Microsoft, these guys have massive co-selling initiatives. We used to hear about channel and deal registrations, things like that all the time. These are companies actually practicing co-selling at scale, where they have effective programs now giving them massive lift. And even services partners have jumped on. I was surprised by this. But if you look at Wipro, Deloitte, Accenture, these companies have actually created new co-selling initiatives working with ISVs and startups. Deloitte in particular has started an initiative around co-selling with data and AI partners. So if you have a data and AI startup, they actually have a co-selling program to work with you. Like, what a refreshing change. This is amazing. ABB, an industrial conglomerate, they have built software because they want to go into IoT space. They are working in co-selling format because they don't know how to sell to CIOs. They know how to sell to large, they know how to sell machines. They don't know how to sell software. So they are partnering and co-selling in this environment. So all these benefits, great examples already out there. This is a fun time for the profession. This is an amazing time to actually be here and learn these new best practices and go back to your companies and champion them. And we are very, very excited to work with all of you, as we work together to make the ecosystem profession even greater than it is. So thank you for this time. I really appreciate this.